Do you hear it? That is not the wind. It is the cold ocean water creeping closer. Just hours ago, this was the most luxurious, the most advanced, and unquestionably the safest ship in the world. Lights flooded every deck. Music echoed through the grand halls. People dressed in their finest clothes, savoring this transatlantic voyage. They believed this ship was unsinkable. Newspapers once hailed her the unsinkable giant. But now, in the pitch-black heart of the Atlantic, an inevitable disaster draws near. My name is William. I am merely an ordinary passenger aboard the Titanic. I never imagined I would become a part of history. I only boarded this ship, chasing a new life. The date is April the 14th, 1912. In just a few hours, this greatest miracle crafted by human hands will sink into the icy depths of the ocean. Over 1,500 souls will rest here forever. If you stood in this moment in 1912, you would sense nothing out of the ordinary. Everything seemed too perfect. The Titanic was no ordinary vessel. She embodied the grandest dream of an entire era, owned by the White Star Line, stretching 269 meters in length. Her towering hull rose like a floating city upon the waves. She housed fine dining rooms, libraries, swimming pools, luxury suites, and even elevators. To anyone stepping aboard for the first time, this was not a ship, it was a floating palace. I am a third-class passenger. My cabin is not spacious like first class. No exquisite furniture, no private service. Yet to me, it was luxury enough. For this ship stood for hope. People like me did not board the Titanic for leisure. We boarded to rewrite our lives. Countless third-class passengers were sailing for America, in pursuit of new jobs, new lands, and new chances. We carried all our worldly possessions in a few suitcases, along with photos, letters, and every fantasy of the future. We believed that across the Atlantic, a brand new beginning awaited us. First class was a world apart entirely. It housed millionaires, entrepreneurs, nobles, and social elites. They dined on exquisite cuisine, sipped rare vintage wine, discussing business, politics, and the future of mankind. They were convinced humanity was entering a golden age. Technology was reshaping the world. Steam engines conquered the oceans. Railways connected continents. Skyscrapers towered over cities. Humans grew increasingly arrogant, believing we had mastered nature. Perhaps that was the greatest illusion of this age. We had forgotten one eternal truth. The ocean has never been conquered by man. It only allows us to sail upon its surface for a time. On the night of April the 14th, the Titanic steamed forward at full speed. The air was bitterly cold. No moon lit the sky. The sea lay terrifyingly calm. No towering waves, no raging storms, only endless darkness. This unnatural lull lulled everyone into complacency. By 9 o'clock in the evening, wireless operators received repeated iceberg warnings from nearby vessels. Yet few took the danger seriously. The Titanic was far too massive, far too advanced. Everyone believed she could weather any accident. At 10 o'clock, the last diners finished their supper. Music still filled the halls. People chatted, drank, and planned their new lives in New York. None knew they were savoring the final hours of their lives. By 11 o'clock, most passengers had retired to their cabins. Some read, some wrote letters, some prepared for sleep. One passenger penned a line, "This ship is wonderfully comfortable." He would never know that letter would never reach its destination. Up at the bow, lookouts stood watch. They stared into the black ocean. No moonlight, no binoculars, only their naked eyes. They could not see the colossal iceberg drifting silently ahead, lying in wait for the great ship. At 11:40 p.m., everything changed. A lookout spotted a massive black shadow dead ahead. He immediately sounded the alarm. Iceberg, right ahead. The warning rushed to the bridge. Crew members reacted instantly, swerving the ship and reversing the engines. They fought to avoid the collision, but it was too late. The Titanic was too large, moving too fast, too close to danger. Seconds later, her starboard side scraped the iceberg. There was no violent explosion, no deafening crash like in the movies. Only a low, grinding rumble, like a giant blade slicing through steel. Most passengers never woke. Many felt only a faint tremor, turned over, and drifted back to sleep. They could not fathom that the unsinkable ship could ever fall. Yet deep in the lower decks, engineers knew the truth. Seawater was flooding in, faster and faster by the second. Captain Edward Smith entered the control room, his face draining pale. He knew this was no minor accident. His ship was dying. In the first minutes after impact, no one grasped the severity of the crisis. People expected disaster to bring thunderous noise, flames, and chaos. But there was nothing. The Titanic still blazed with lights. Music still played. The corridors stayed quiet. Most passengers remained oblivious that their fates had been sealed. Some opened their doors and asked what had happened. Others laughed it off, we merely struck a piece of ice. There was no fear, only absolute faith. Faith in the ship, her designers, her engineers, and the technology of their era. Above all, they believed the Titanic could never sink. But below deck, the scene was horrifically different. Engineers inspected the damage in despair. Seawater surged relentlessly, flooding compartment after compartment. Icy tides devoured the giant ship from within. They ran the calculations, and the result was devastating. The ship was never truly unsinkable. She could only withstand damage longer than any vessel before her. The truth finally reached the captain. Edward Smith knew with cold certainty the Titanic would not stay afloat. He faced an unalterable fact: his ship was bound for the bottom of the Atlantic. Then came the fatal problem: lifeboats. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, a number that sounded sufficient. But for over 2,200 souls aboard, it was tragically inadequate. This was the unforeseen flaw of the legendary vessel. Equipped with cutting-edge technology, impenetrable structures, and supreme luxury, yet lacking enough space to save everyone on board. This was no engineering failure. It was a choice: who would live, and who would perish. Crew members rushed to rouse every passenger. Put on your life vests. Proceed to the deck immediately. Still, most refused to believe disaster was real. They stumbled out in their nightgowns, confused and irritated. Music still played in the halls, lights still shone bright. It felt like nothing more than a routine evacuation drill. Some even refused to board the lifeboats. They believed staying on the massive ship was far safer than drifting on the frigid ocean in tiny boats. Why abandon an unsinkable ship? This is humanity's deadliest flaw in the face of catastrophe. Not fear, but disbelief. The first lifeboats were lowered, carrying women and children. Yet many seats remained empty. People still could not accept that the end had come. Meanwhile, third-class passengers began to grasp the gravity of the situation. They came from Britain, Ireland, Sweden, Italy. Ordinary people crossing the ocean for a better future. Now they faced the possibility of never reaching their destination. They were no celebrities, no wealthy tycoons, no powerful figures. They were just families, clinging to dreams and hope. Yet on this dark night, social class dictated survival. The ship tilted steeper by the minute. Panic finally erupted. Decks sloped sharply, walking became impossible. Cups slid off tables. Seawater flooded the hallways. The floating palace had turned into a deadly trap. In the music hall, the band continued to play. They knew the situation was hopeless, that time was running out. Yet they chose to keep performing. Perhaps to calm the terrified crowd. Perhaps because it was the only thing left they could do. Every note they played became the final soundtrack of this doomed night. More lifeboats departed, yet chaos spread rapidly. People fought for seats, wept loudly, and searched frantically for their families. Yet even in this chaos, countless ordinary souls chose kindness amid death. History remembers the heroes. But the true greatness of that night lies not in a few brave souls, but in the humanity millions of ordinary people preserved in the face of certain death. Fathers escorted their wives and children to safety, then stepped back to face death alone. Elderly couples held hands, choosing to spend their final moments together. Crew members worked tirelessly until the waves swallowed the decks beneath their feet. They knew the outcome was inevitable, yet they persisted in their duty. The Titanic's fate could no longer be denied. Her bow sank lower and lower, the cold tide climbing steadily upward. The Atlantic remained eerily calm, no storms, no waves, only endless icy darkness. The world's greatest ship was fading slowly into the abyss. Passengers finally understood the terrible truth. The real disaster was not the collision with the iceberg. It was the moment you realized there was no escape. The last lifeboats pulled away from the sinking vessel. More and more people were left behind. They stood on the tilting decks, watching the small boats fade into the darkness. Watching their last chance at survival drift away. Only minutes remained before the ocean consumed the Titanic entirely. The ship no longer resembled a vessel. It looked like a collapsing city. Once opulent halls, carpeted corridors, brightly lit chambers. All were swallowed inch by the freezing seawater. Hours earlier, people had dined, talked business, dreamed of new lives in New York. No one imagined their lives would end in this dark, desolate ocean. I stood on the sharply tilting deck, Suro.